A humble housekeeper suspected that the millionaire she worked for was poisoning his own father inside the mansion. Armed with only a blue notebook, an old cell phone, and her faith in God, she decided to confront powerful people and reveal a cruel plan that nearly took the life of a helpless old man. From the moment the truth came to light, inheritances, power, and masks began to crumble, and the lives of everyone in that house changed forever in a way no one could have imagined. This is a story of courage, justice, faith, and redemption that will move you, so prepare yourself, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and comment where you're watching from. Marianne Smith was 32 years old and had hands trained to perceive what others' eyes pretended not to see. She woke up every day at 4:30 in the morning, when Oakwood Creek was still asleep under the scent of bread rising in the corner bakeries. She took a quick shower, the cold water falling on the back of her neck while she listened, through the thin wall, to the snores of her unemployed brother-in-law who shared the back room with her sister. She put on the navy blue uniform she had ironed the night before, tied her black hair into a low, tight bun, and left without making a sound so as not to wake her daughter, Louise, who was sleeping on her stomach on the mattress next to hers, hugging a faded teddy bear. She went out into the still dark street, where the yellowish streetlights illuminated the cracked asphalt and graffitied walls. She walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, where she always found the same figures: the baker in a dirty cap, the nurse from the community clinic with deep dark circles under her eyes, the night watchman returning from his shift. No one talked much. They just exchanged tired glances, nods, perhaps a good morning, mumbled between yawns. The first bus was always late, and she would stand there holding her floral fabric bag against her body, feeling the early morning chill seep through the cuffs of her worn wool sweater. On the bus, she always looked for the same seat, near the window, where she could rest her forehead against the cold glass and close her eyes for a few minutes. The smell of sweat mixed with cheap perfume filled the air, and the roar of the engine competed with the sound of country music playing softly on other people's phones. On the second bus, even more crowded, she stood, clinging to the iron bar, swaying with the turns and sudden stops. It took almost 2 hours to reach the neighborhood of Summit Hills, where the streets widened, the walls grew taller, and the trees formed a green, fragrant canopy that she never felt in the outskirts. The Albright mansion stood imposing behind a tall gate of black iron and mirrored glass that reflected the blue Chicago sky. When she rang the bell, she always waited a few seconds until Stuart, the house manager, let her in through the intercom. His voice was dry, impatient, as if every second lost on employees was a waste. Marianne entered through the side gate, walked around the infinity pool that sparkled in the morning sun, passed by the garden where imported roses exuded a sweet perfume, and reached the back door, which led directly to the service area. There she exchanged her worn-out shoes for rubber slippers, stored her bag in the metal locker, and began her day. She was a woman of few words, contained courage, a sharp sense of justice, and an almost automatic habit of noticing everything. Her brown eyes missed nothing: the glass out of place on the marble countertop, the medicine forgotten on the silver tray, the tone of voice that rose half a centimeter when someone was lying. She noticed when a door was left ajar for no reason, when a drawer was hastily rummaged through, when someone averted their gaze when asked about anything. She had this ability since childhood, when she had to guess her mother's mood by the way she banged a pot on the stove, or by the heavy silence that filled the house before a scolding. In her apron pocket, she kept a worn rosary with plastic beads that had long lost their original shine. She ran her fingers over it whenever her heart felt heavy, murmuring Hail Marys in a voice so low that even she could barely hear it. In her floral fabric bag, she carried a blue hardcover notebook, the kind used for school, where she jotted down tasks, schedules, and small details that no one asked for, but that she insisted on recording. Change sheets in the guest room, wash living room curtains, buy neutral soap for the white towels. And in recent months, other, stranger, more worrying notes. Mr. Albert refused lunch again, hands trembling after 3 o'clock tea. Vacant stare when looking at the garden. The old man of the house, Albert Albright, 80 years old, father of the millionaire Richard, was the victim her heart had adopted without permission. Since she started working there 3 years ago, Marianne had developed a silent affection for the elderly man. He greeted her every morning with a nod, asked about her daughter, commented on the weather. They were small gestures, but they made her feel seen, acknowledged, treated like a person. Unlike the other residents of the house, who barely noticed her presence or treated her as part of the furniture. But in the last 6 months, something had changed. Albert had begun to lose weight visibly, meal after meal. His linen trousers became loose at the waist, his Egyptian cotton shirts hung from his once broad and firm shoulders. His face, which had a healthy rosy color, now looked pale, almost ashen. His blue eyes, once lively and attentive, were often lost, as if looking at something no one else could see. Marianne felt the same tightness in her chest that had accompanied her when her grandfather died in the public hospital years before, after she had ignored the signs that something was wrong. The old guilt lived there, silent, heavy as a stone in her stomach. She remembered her grandfather coughing up blood in the corner of the room, her thinking it was just a bad flu, waiting too long before taking him to the clinic. By the time they finally got to the hospital, it was too late. The pneumonia had already spread, and he died 3 days later in a cold, poorly lit corridor, holding her hand while apologizing for being a bother. Marianne swore that day that she would never again ignore the signs, that she would never again let someone waste away without doing anything. But now, facing Mr. Albert, she felt paralyzed by other fears. She was afraid of not being heard again, of her concern being dismissed as exaggeration because she was a housekeeper and poor, as an undue intrusion into matters that were none of her business. And even more, she was terrified of confrontation. She desperately needed that job to support her 9-year-old daughter, Louise, who was studying thanks to a scholarship at a private school recommended by Richard himself. The scholarship covered tuition, supplies, and uniform. Without it, Louise would return to the public school in their neighborhood, where teachers were often absent, where school lunches were meager, where the future seemed too narrow to fit the girl's dreams. 2 objectives guided her, even without a clear name: to protect Mr. Albert's fragile body and to find out why he seemed to be wasting away after every meal. 2 obstacles erected walls around her: the strict control of Stuart, the house manager who watched schedules, cameras, and access with a hawk's eye, and the emotional knot that made her swallow her words whenever she thought of questioning a boss. How many times had she mentally rehearsed a conversation, imagined herself walking into Richard's glass-walled office and saying, "Mr. Richard, excuse me, but don't you think your father needs a real doctor?" But every time the opportunity arose, the words died in her throat. Her voice got stuck, her hands grew cold and sweaty, and she would end up just serving the coffee in silence, lowering her eyes and quietly leaving. Every night, as she cleared the dishes from the pantry alone while the family retired to their rooms upstairs, Marianne developed a silent ritual. She ran her finger along the bottom of the crystal glasses, looking for strange residues. She checked the containers in the stainless steel refrigerator, smelling sauces, checking dates. She listened to the ticking of the old kitchen clock, a sound that seemed to mark not only the hours but also the time running out for Mr. Albert. And alone there, with her hands immersed in dish soap foam, she whispered in a voice so thin it barely left her lips, "God, you see all of this. Show me what I can't prove yet. Give me the courage not to stay silent again." The hot water from the tap warmed her red, chapped hands, the lemon scent of the soap mixed with the residual aroma of the dinner she herself had prepared. And outside, through the kitchen window, the city lights twinkled in the distance, indifferent to the drama unfolding within those high, well-protected walls. In the day-to-day life of the house, Marianne seemed to move in silence, almost invisible among the wide hallways with imported marble floors and the rooms decorated with paintings that cost more than she would earn in 10 years of work. But inside, she was collecting signs like someone assembling a dangerous puzzle, one piece at a time, trying to see the whole picture before it was too late. She first noticed it in Mr. Albert's linen trousers, the light beige ones he wore to sunbathe in the garden on Sunday afternoons. They started to need a new belt and then another, even without a prescribed diet, even without any food. Restrictions. Marianne, who ironed and folded those clothes every week, noticed how the fabric was loose at the waist, how the legs were baggier. Then it was the cotton shirts, which hung from his once broad and now thin, almost fragile shoulders. She discreetly jotted it down in her blue notebook, always at night when she returned home on the crowded bus. Tuesday, less sparkle in his eyes after lunch. Thursday, hands trembling while holding the cup after tea. Saturday, cold sweat after the strawberry dessert. The notes piled up, page after page, forming a record that no one but her knew existed. A diary of symptoms that shouldn't exist in a man who, according to everyone, was receiving the best medical care money could buy. The luxurious routine of the mansion continued, loud and relentless. Business meetings took place in the glass-walled office, where Richard received men in grey suits and Italian ties, talking loudly about investments, real estate, and stock market shares. Their laughter echoed through the hallways, confident and hollow. Bianca, the daughter-in-law, moved through the house in expensive dresses that rustled as she walked, high heels clicking on the floor like little hammer blows. She organized dinner parties for 20 people, chose imported wines from the climate-controlled cellar, and commanded the hired waiters with precise gestures and smiles that never reached her eyes. Marianne removed red wine stains from the Persian rug in the living room, scrubbing with specific products that Stuart kept locked in a cabinet. She collected crumpled linen napkins, crystal glasses with lipstick marks, and porcelain plates where expensive food had only been nibbled at. The friction between the noise of status and the silence of humble work was evident at every moment. The intercom would ring for a delivery of imported flowers, while she mentally calculated if she could afford the gas bill at the end of the month. The gardener came 3 times a week to tend to the rose bushes, while in Oakwood Creek, children played in the open sewer. One humid afternoon, while washing the English porcelain cups in the pantry sink, Marianne saw something that made her heart race. A whitish powder clung to the bottom of one of the cups, forming a thin film that wouldn't come off with just water. She had to scrub it with a sponge, using more force than usual, and even then, a light mark remained on the white bottom. She stored that image in her memory, along with all the others. On another occasion, while serving afternoon tea to Mr. Albert on the covered porch, she smelled a slightly sweet scent that didn't match the chamomile she herself had prepared that morning, using dried flowers from the glass jar in the kitchen. It was an artificial, chemical sweetness, reminiscent of disguised medicine. Albert drank slowly, his trembling hand holding the cup, and Marianne stood a few feet away, pretending to arrange the sofa cushions while she watched. 20 minutes later, he started to sweat, asked to lie down, and she had to help him walk to his room, feeling his thin weight lean on her shoulder. Bianca always insisted, in a sweet voice that sounded like honey on glass. "Mr. Albert, eat everything. It's what's best for you. Dr. Fabian prepared it especially thinking of your health." And he, obedient and growing weaker, would bring the spoon to his mouth, even when his face contorted in an expression of disgust. Marianne saw all of this from the corner of her eye, while clearing plates, bringing fresh water, and pretending not to pay attention. Over time, she grew closer to 2 people who seemed to be rowing against the current of calculated coldness that dominated the house. Carla was a shift nurse who came twice a week, on Tuesdays and Fridays, to check Albert's vital signs, change dressings on small wounds, and administer prescribed medications. She was in her 40s with short, dyed blonde hair, steady hands, and a direct way of speaking that Marianne admired. Carla genuinely cared about the old man. She noticed the new bruises that appeared on his arms, purple marks that shouldn't have been there. "He's weaker than he should be," she muttered one day, after taking his blood pressure for the 3rd time in a row, frowning at the low numbers. "This rapid decline isn't normal. I've seen a lot of elderly people in my career, and this doesn't add up." Marianne etched the phrase into her heart. That night she wrote in her notebook, "Carla thinks it's strange. She sees it too." Her other unexpected ally was Mrs. Susan, the Albright family's former cook, who now worked as a doorman at a residential building on the same street, 3 blocks from the mansion. Marianne sometimes ran into her at the bus stop in the late afternoon when her shift ended. Susan was almost 60, with a small frame and hands marked by decades of hard work. She told stories from the time she cooked for the family 15 years ago, when Albert was still a strong and active man. "Back then, honey, he ate everything," Susan would say, sitting on the worn-out bench at the bus stop, fanning herself with a paper fan. Saturday chili, Sunday barbecue, cornbread cake for afternoon tea. He never needed these modern powders, these imported vitamins. Real food, made with love. That's what he liked. She would pause, looking at the street traffic, and add in a lower voice, "After I left, things changed a lot in there. Richard took over everything, brought in that fussy Bianca, and the old man was pushed aside. You be careful, Marianne. Some people only see money, they forget they're dealing with flesh and blood people." Susan's words echoed in Marianne's head during sleepless nights, as she tossed and turned on her narrow bed, trying to decide what to do, how to act, who to turn to. While collecting the kitchen trash one Wednesday morning, separating recyclables, as Stuart demanded, Marianne found a crumpled piece of paper at the bottom of the stainless steel trash can. She smoothed it out carefully and read the hurried handwritten notes, dosages in milligrams, medical acronyms she didn't fully understand, but recognized as names of medications. The paper was torn in half, as if someone had tried to destroy the evidence in a hurry. She put the piece in her apron pocket, feeling her heart beat faster. That same day, while changing a burnt-out light bulb in the service area, she noticed something hanging discreetly on the circuit breaker box embedded in the wall. A small silver metal key with a white tag on which was written in blue pen, "Side Pantry." Marianne frowned. She had worked there for 3 years and had never seen anyone use that key, had never noticed a side pantry. She looked around, making sure she was alone, and saw the discreet door next to the kitchen painted the same beige color as the wall, almost invisible. A door she had always assumed was just a closet for brooms or equipment. 2 doors that might open in the future. 2 secrets she recorded in her blue notebook, noting the date and time, as if she were building a case file for a court that did not yet exist. Every small attempt to get closer to the truth had a high and immediate price. One Thursday, she stayed late to check all the dinner dishes, examining each piece carefully, looking for residue, smelling the bottoms of pots. She missed the last bus that ran at 10:30 at night. She had to wait almost an hour for the next one, alone at the dark and dangerous bus stop, hearing strange noises coming from the vacant lot next to it. She got home after midnight, found Louise still awake, sitting on the bed with eyes red from crying, and her mother, Mrs. Nora, with the worried and irritated expression of someone who had spent hours not knowing if her daughter was okay. "You're going to lose this job by sticking your nose where it doesn't belong," Mrs. Nora grumbled, serving her a plate of reheated food. "Rich people don't like nosy maids. Just do your job, and that's it." Marianne didn't answer. She just ate in silence, feeling the weight of exhaustion on her shoulders, and when she finally gathered the courage to timidly suggest to Bianca, one Friday morning, that it might be a good idea to call another doctor for a second opinion on Mr. Albert's condition, she received a response that burned inside her like acid. They were in the living room, Bianca arranging flowers in a crystal vase, Marianne collecting the breakfast cups. Richard was also there, reading the newspaper on the leather sofa. "Excuse me, Mrs. Bianca," Marianne began with a trembling voice, "but I've noticed that Mr. Albert is very weak. Maybe it would be good to—" "You stick to your broom, Marianne," Bianca cut her off without even looking at her, continuing to arrange the flowers with delicate gestures. "We're the ones who understand health. We have the best doctors, the best treatments. You don't need to worry about it." Richard lowered his newspaper just enough to look over the top of his reading glasses. His gaze was cold, appraising, like someone observing a bothersome insect. He said nothing, but the message was clear in his eyes. Stay in your place. The humiliation burned in Marianne's throat. She felt her cheeks flush, her eyes well up with tears that she had to swallow hard. She lowered her head, murmured an almost inaudible "excuse me," and left the room holding the tray with hands that trembled with anger and shame. But along with the humiliation, something else was growing inside her. Suspicion was turning into certainty, and certainty, as frightening as it was, brought with it a terrible clarity. She could no longer pretend she didn't see. She could no longer remain silent. Mr. Albert was being slowly poisoned inside his own home, and she was the only one who seemed willing to do something about it. Over time, the shadow behind Mr. Albert's weight loss began to take on a face and an intention. The outlines of what was once just suspicion now took shape with frightening clarity, revealing not only a crime, but the faces of those committing it and the reasons that drove them. Richard Albright, the millionaire son, sported impeccably tailored Italian suits and a smile trained for business magazine photos. He was 46, with graying hair slicked back with imported gel, and an upright posture that conveyed confidence and authority. But behind the reinforced gaits and carefully cultivated appearances, his concerns seemed to be less about his father's health and more about spreadsheets, red numbers, and accumulating debts. Marianne, who served coffee while he discussed business on the phone in his glass-walled office, overheard fragments of conversations that painted a grim picture. "I need liquidity urgently," he said one Tuesday morning, pacing back and forth with his phone glued to his ear. "The investors are losing patience. I can't wait another 5-10 years to access the estate." On another occasion, while Marianne was changing the flowers in the vase on the mahogany desk, she heard, "The problem is that everything is in his name. As long as my father has guardianship over himself, I can't move anything." She saw several times, while tidying up papers Richard left scattered, bank documents marked with a red pen, graphs pointing downward, debt notices. The empire that looked solid from the outside was, in fact, cracking from within. And Albert, with his inconvenient longevity, was the obstacle preventing Richard from restructuring, renegotiating, and saving face in front of his partners and Chicago's high society. Alongside him, as a key piece in this macabre puzzle, was Dr. Fabian Myers, the family's private nutritionist. He always arrived in the mid-afternoon, driving a shiny black Sedan, wearing a pristine white coat over designer shirts. He was in his 50s with a receding hairline disguised by a close-cropped cut, gold-rimmed glasses, and a professional demeanor that inspired trust. He always carried a genuine leather briefcase, full of papers, prescriptions, and small vials labeled with English acronyms that seemed important and scientific. He would explain, to anyone who would listen, that they were state-of-the-art supplements for strengthening the elderly, nutraceutical compounds imported from Germany, essential amino acids to combat sarcopenia. He spoke with authority, cited studies, used technical terms that impressed Bianca and even Richard, who pretended to understand. But Marianne, observing from a distance while folding towels or watering plants, saw things that no one else seemed to notice. She saw Dr. Myers handling the containers with a haste that didn't match the medical seriousness he preached. She saw him mixing the contents of the vials into Albert's mashed potatoes, herbal tea and vegetable soup, always when the kitchen was emptiest, when Stuart went upstairs to answer the phone, when Bianca was busy upstairs. His movements were quick, efficient, practiced. He would take the unlabeled vial from his briefcase, measure out the powder with a measuring spoon, mix it well, put everything back, and leave with a calm smile on his face. The main antagonist had a motivation as clear as water. Richard needed to get rid of his father's guardianship, or at least weaken him enough to obtain a conservatorship, a medical certificate declaring Albert incapable of managing his own assets. With that, he could renegotiate million-dollar debts, sell properties, and make risky investments that the old man would never approve of. He didn't want his father's death, not exactly. He just wanted his legal incapacitation, his documented weakness, his removal from financial decisions. It was a practical, calculated cruelty, dressed up as filial concern. Dr. Myers, the functional accomplice, had his own motivation. He received a generous sum deposited into his account, money that substantially supplemented his official income as a nutritionist. More than that, Richard had promised to recommend him for a chain of aesthetic clinics he planned to open, a position as technical director that would multiply his status and his bank account. All he had to do was provide a convenient report, administer a treatment that weakened without raising suspicion, and keep his mouth shut. Neither of them wanted a sudden death, which would attract investigations, autopsies, and uncomfortable questions. Just a slow decline, one that looked like the natural course of old age. The first major turning point in uncovering the truth came on a rainy October night. The sky poured thick water over Chicago, thunder cracked the air, and lightning illuminated the mansion's windows in sudden white flashes. Marianne, remembering the torn paper she had found weeks earlier, waited for everyone to retire. Richard had gone up early, complaining of a headache. Bianca was in her room on the phone with a friend, her voice echoing down the hall. Stuart had left early, a rare occurrence, to handle a personal emergency. With her heart pounding, Marianne went down to the pantry, lit only by the faint light over the sink. The rain drummed against the windows, creating a sound that muffled any other noise. She discreetly searched the trash can on the counter, where Dr. Myers always prepared his mixtures, the stainless steel one under the countertop. At the bottom, under fruit peels and dirty napkins, she found an empty package. She wiped it clean with the corner of her apron and brought it closer to the light. It was a small dark glass vial with a partially torn label, but she could still read part of the alphanumeric code, the same letters and numbers that were on the torn paper she kept at home, hidden inside her Bible. Her hands trembled as she photographed the package with her old cell phone, getting as close as possible to capture the details. The battery was almost dead, and the flash could attract attention, so she used only the light from the screen itself, 3 photos from different angles. Then she put the package back in the trash, making sure it was in the same position as before. She was about to go upstairs when she heard voices coming from the office. The door was ajar, a sliver of yellow light escaping into the hallway. She approached carefully, barefoot on the cold marble floor, controlling her breathing. She recognized Richard's voice, followed by Dr. Myers. They must not have known she was still there. If the report indicates progressive malnutrition, early-onset senile dementia, no one can say it was our fault, Doctor, Richard was saying. His voice sounded tired but determined. It's the natural course of age. I just need this not to take much longer. The creditors are on my back. I understand perfectly, Dr. Myers replied in a professional, almost bored tone, as if they were discussing the weather forecast. In the coming weeks, I'll adjust the dosage. Nothing dramatic, just enough to accelerate the condition. In 2-3 months at most, he won't be able to sign anything, to decide anything. Then you apply for the conservatorship, present my report, and that's it. And it won't be too obvious? Relax. It will look exactly like it's supposed to look, an 80-year-old man wasting away naturally. No one will question it. Marianne leaned against the wall, feeling her legs go weak. Nausea rose in her throat. Every word was a condemnation, a crystal-clear confession. But at the same time, it was proof. She wanted to record it, but her phone's battery was dead. She stood there, memorizing every sentence, repeating them mentally so she wouldn't forget. The weight of the discovery almost crushed her. Back in the small service room, that 3-square-meter cubicle where she kept her personal belongings and sometimes rested between tasks, she sat on the single bed with its thin mattress and cried silently. She covered her mouth with both hands to muffle the sobs, feeling her chest ache from holding it all in. The internal conflict throbbed like an open wound. If she reported it, she could lose her job, her reference, her daughter's scholarship. Richard had expensive lawyers, political connections, power. Who would believe the word of a housekeeper against a respected businessman? And even if they did, how long would it take? How much suffering would it bring to her family? If she stayed silent, she would relive the guilt of her grandfather, but multiplied 1,000 times. She would watch Albert waste away, until he was nothing, until he became an empty body in a hospital bed, while Richard signed papers and transferred fortunes. The guilt would eat her alive, just as it had for years after her grandfather's death. She seriously considered leaving, quitting the next morning, running away from this impossible situation. She mentally started doing the math. How much she had saved, how long she could last unemployed, where Louise could study. But when she finally stood up, washed her face in the tiny bathroom, and went upstairs to bring a glass of water to Albert, as she did every night, something changed. The old man was sitting up in bed, looking out the window at the rain that was still falling. He turned when he saw her enter, and his blue eyes, though tired, had a momentary clarity. "Marianne," he said in a weak voice, taking the glass of water from her hands, "you're the only one here who looks me in the eye, who treats me like a person, not a burden." He paused, took a sip, and continued. "If you ever notice anything wrong, anything that's not right with me, don't leave me alone, promise?" Tears returned to her eyes, but this time they were different. They were not tears of despair, but of decision. She gently squeezed the old man's wrinkled hand, feeling the fragile bones under the thin skin. "I promise, Mr. Albert. I promise." That night, as she rode home on the nearly empty bus, looking at the wet city through the fogged-up window, Marianne knew there was no turning back. She had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer just a silent witness. She was a fighter in an unequal war, armed only with the truth and a trembling faith that God would not abandon those who chose the right side, even when the price was too high to calculate. The night everything began to change had a heavy, electric feel, as if the house itself were waiting for something inevitable. The wind beat against the large living room windows, making them shudder in their aluminum frames. The Albright mansion, usually full of voices and movement, seemed emptier than ever, the hallways echoing with solitary footsteps, the lights creating elongated shadows on the walls. Richard had traveled to New York that morning for an urgent meeting with investors, taking 2 suitcases and the promise to return only at the end of the week. Bianca had gone out to a charity dinner with high society friends, dressed in a peacock blue gown that cost more than Marianne's annual salary. Only Stuart, a few staff members, and old Albert remained in the house. He had eaten dinner early and gone up to his room complaining of fatigue. Dr. Myers arrived later than usual, around 9 o'clock, saying he needed to adjust the medication because of the latest tests, which had shown a worrying drop in nutritional levels. Marianne saw him enter through the kitchen door, carrying his leather briefcase as always, but with a hurried air that was uncharacteristic. He greeted her with a brief nod and went straight to the counter where he usually worked. Marianne, her ankle still sore from a recent fall on the service stairs while carrying a heavy basket of laundry, knew this was her chance. She had thought about it for days, planned every move, mentally rehearsed every possibility. She took the old cell phone from her apron pocket, checked if there was enough memory, and deleted some old photos of Louise to free up space. She tested the camera, the audio. It worked, albeit precariously. She remembered the key labeled side pantry that she had observed weeks earlier on the circuit breaker box. She waited for Stuart to go upstairs to take a personal call, saw him through the window lighting a cigarette on the second-floor balcony. She seized the moment, walked to the box with her heart pounding, and took the small silver key. Her hands were cold and sweaty, the metal slippery between her trembling fingers. She unlocked the discreet door next to the kitchen, the one she had always thought was just a broom closet. The door creaked slightly as it opened, revealing a narrow, dark space filled with shelves of canned goods, cardboard boxes, and old equipment. There was a smell of mold and accumulated dust. Marianne stepped inside, pulled the door almost shut behind her, leaving only a tiny crack through which she could see part of the kitchen counter. There, hidden in a dark corner between 2 high shelves, her ankle throbbing with pain at every movement, she activated the phone's camera. She looked for a place where she could prop it up discreetly, finding a space between a jar of granulated sugar and a tin of cookies. It wouldn't be a perfect image, the angle wasn't ideal, but it would show the essential. She started recording and prayed silently that the battery would last. She saw Dr. Myers open his leather briefcase on the granite countertop, look around carefully and make sure he was alone. He took out a small vial with no commercial label, just a handwritten tag with codes Marianne couldn't read from her hiding place. He opened the vial, poured a light, fine powder into the vegetable soup she herself had prepared earlier for Albert's late dinner. He stirred it with a wooden spoon, completely dissolving the powder in the golden liquid. His movements were precise, practiced, swift. Then came the sentence that Marianne would record not only on her phone, but in her memory forever. Dr. Myers, speaking to himself in a murmur loud enough to be captured, said as he stirred the soup, "With this stronger dose, the process will speed up, but it will look natural. In a few months, he won't get out of bed anymore. Richard will get what he wants, and I'll get my new clinic. The audio was recorded along with the movement of his hands, the image shaky but understandable. Marianne felt a mixture of victory and terror. She had the proof. She had the confession. But now she had to get out of there without being discovered. Obstacles arose before she could even move. She heard Stuart's heavy footsteps coming down the stairs, his voice calling for Dr. Myers to clarify something about the medication schedule. The manager entered the kitchen just as Marianne was trying to retrieve her phone from where she had hidden it. Her heart stopped. She stood completely still, holding her breath, her body squeezed between the shelves. Dr. Myers and Stuart talked for nearly 10 minutes that felt like hours. Marianne heard every word, every movement, feeling a cramp begin to form in her calf from the uncomfortable position she was in. Her injured ankle hurt so much she had to bite her lip to keep from groaning. Finally, Dr. Myers left with his briefcase, and Stuart stayed behind, organizing some papers on the table. Before he left, Marianne heard the sound of keys jangling. Stuart had noticed. "Where's the key to the side pantry?" he muttered to himself, looking at the circuit breaker box. He checked his pockets, his keychain. Marianne felt panic rise in her throat like bile. If he opened that door now, he would find her there, hiding, with the phone in her hand. There would be no possible explanation. But Stuart just grumbled something about having lost the key, made a mental note and left the kitchen, turning off the lights. Marianne waited in the darkness for another 20 minutes, counting the seconds, hearing only the hum of the refrigerator and the desperate beating of her own heart. When she finally found the courage to move, she opened the door slowly, peeked into the empty hallway and slipped out. She had to press her body against the wall to pass, without making a sound, feeling the sharp pain in her ankle worsen with each step. She pretended she had gone to get cloths from the laundry area in case anyone saw her. She went up to the small service room with shaky legs, closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the cold floor. The video was there. 3 minutes and 40 seconds of irrefutable proof. But when she tried to send it somewhere safe, she discovered that the house's internet signal was blocked after 10 o'clock at night, a decision by Richard to avoid employee distractions and ensure network security. There was no Wi-Fi available, and the mobile data on her old phone had long since run out. She sat there, holding the device as if it were a bomb about to explode. She had proof in her hands, but no easy way to protect it, to share it, to ensure it wouldn't be deleted or destroyed. The price of that night came quickly and heavily. The next morning, Stuart called her into the living room, the one with white leather armchairs and abstract paintings on the walls. He was sitting behind the fine wooden desk, with a serious expression and cold eyes that seemed to X-ray her soul. "Marianne, I noticed the key to the side pantry is missing from the circuit breaker box," he said bluntly. "And upon reviewing the internal security cameras, I noticed unauthorized movement in the kitchen area, around 9:30 last night. Were you there?" Marianne felt her throat go dry. She thought quickly, keeping her face as neutral as possible. "I was finishing the dishes, Mr. Stuart, and then I went to get some cloths from the laundry area, because I had spilled water in the hallway. I must have taken longer than usual because of my injured ankle." He looked at her for long seconds, assessing, suspicious. "Well, be aware that part of your salary this month will be docked for breach of trust and being in unauthorized areas outside of hours. And if there are any other irregularities, you will be terminated immediately. Is that understood?" She swallowed her tears, clasped her hands behind her back so he wouldn't see them shaking. "Yes, sir, I'm sorry." She left the room with the world spinning around her. The pay cut meant she wouldn't be able to pay all her bills that month. It meant tightening her belt even further, maybe even borrowing money from her mother. But the phone was still in her apron pocket, warm against her thigh, holding the secret that could change everything. Later, at the nearly empty bus stop at 11 o'clock at night, she ran into Ansel, the security guard she had been talking to for months. He worked as a night watchman for a logistics company on the same street, a man in his 50s with graying hair and an honest, direct manner. They always exchanged a few words while waiting for the bus. That night, after looking around to make sure they were alone, Marianne showed him the video. Ansel held the phone carefully, watched in silence, his face hardening with each passing second. When it was over, he handed the phone back and said, This is serious, Marianne. Very serious. You could be in danger if these people find out. I know. That's why I need help. If something happens to me, if my phone disappears, send it to my WhatsApp now. I'll save a copy. If you need it, I have a cousin who's a cop, and my sister knows people who work in regulatory agencies. Right there, at the bus stop illuminated by a flickering old streetlight, she sent the video to his number. The connection was poor, and it took almost 10 minutes to upload. But finally the message appeared. Sent successfully. For the first time in weeks, Marianne breathed a little easier. The proof was no longer just with her. It was protected, however minimally, however precariously. During that same wait, as the bus was late, Carla drove by on her way home from another shift. She stopped when she saw Marianne there alone and offered her a ride. During the short trip to Oakwood Creek, Marianne told her part of what she had discovered. Carla listened in silence, her hands firm on the steering wheel, her face intermittently illuminated by the headlights of oncoming cars. I noted in his chart today the worst drop in blood pressure since the treatment began, Carla said. He's going into nutritional collapse. If we don't act soon, it will be too late. The lines of force were beginning to point outside the mansion's walls. The secret was no longer Marianne's alone. Other people knew, other people believed, other people were willing to act. The safety net, still fragile, was beginning to form. A few weeks later, the truth began to walk toward the light of day, albeit slowly and tortuously, like water finding cracks in a stone and widening the path until it becomes a river. The days following the video recording were filled with constant tension, of fear disguised as routine, of every gesture measured and every word weighed before being spoken. Marianne continued her duties in the mansion as if nothing had happened, but inside she felt like someone balancing on the edge of a cliff. She saw Dr. Myers come and go, saw Richard return from New York more nervous than ever, saw Bianca move through the house with cold, calculated smiles. And she saw above all Mr. Albert, withering a little more each day, his body shrinking inside his clothes, his eyes losing that last spark of clarity they still held. Until one rainy Tuesday, in the middle of lunch, the thing everyone feared but no one admitted to expecting happened. Albert brought the spoonful of soup to his lips, took a few drops and suddenly let the spoon fall onto the embroidered linen tablecloth. His hand went to his chest, his face turned pale as wax, and his lips took on a bluish tint. Bianca screamed, and before anyone could react, the old man collapsed at the table, sliding from his chair. He was rushed to the private hospital the family had a contract with, St. Luke's Clinic, in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. The ambulance arrived in less than 15 minutes, its siren cutting through the afternoon air, efficient paramedics carrying equipment. Marianne, who was in the kitchen when she heard the scream, ran to the dining room. She found Albert on the floor, Bianca in theatrical tears, and Richard on the phone calling the private doctor. When the paramedics placed him on the stretcher, the old man opened his eyes for a brief moment, looked around and found Marianne's face. He extended a trembling hand toward her, a weak but unmistakable gesture. "Marianne," he murmured in an almost inaudible voice, "come with me." Richard and Bianca exchanged irritated glances. "It's unnecessary to bring the maid," Bianca began, but Albert grabbed Marianne's hand. With a surprising strength for someone so weak, refusing to let go. The paramedics, accustomed to family dramas, just shrugged. "If it calms the patient, it's better to let her," one of them said. Marianne went in the ambulance, sitting in a tight corner, holding Albert's cold hand while he breathed oxygen through a mask. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. At the hospital, she was allowed to stay in the waiting room while Albert was treated in the emergency room. There, sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair between old magazines, and the strong smell of disinfectant, she saw Carla arriving for her afternoon shift. The nurse, upon seeing Marianne, came straight over to her. "What happened?" "He fainted during lunch, turned all pale, couldn't breathe." Carla frowned, looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Wait here. I'll see what I can find out." Half an hour later, Carla returned with a serious expression. She took Marianne to a small, empty break room at the end of the hall and closed the door. "I managed to talk to Dr. Henry, the attending physician who's treating Mr. Albert. He's a friend of mine from college, a trustworthy person. I told him there were suspicions, suggested they run specific tests to detect an excess of certain substances. And did he agree? He was skeptical at first, but when I showed him the records I'd kept in his private chart over the last few weeks, the progressive drops in blood pressure, the signs of chronic poisoning, he agreed. He's going to order a full toxicology screening." Marianne felt tears burn her eyes. For the first time in months, a spark of hope. "Carla, thank you. You don't know how much we take care of those who need it, Marianne. It's what we do." Meanwhile, far from the sterile hospital environment, the secretly recorded video had already traveled silent and strategic paths. Ansel, true to his word, had shown the recording to his cousin, a police officer named Junior who worked in the Bridgeport precinct. Junior, struck by the gravity of the content, decided not to act through the regular police force, where Richard's political connections could bury any investigation. Instead, he discreetly forwarded the material to an acquaintance who worked for the state health department. This employee happened to be the nephew of Mrs. Irene, one of the ladies from the prayer group at the parish Marianne attended on Wednesdays when she could get off work early. The pieces were all on the board, positioned long before they were needed, now fitting together like a divine puzzle. His name was Charles Edward. He was in his mid-30s, a biochemist by training, and he took his job with almost religious seriousness. A family gathering coincided, by chance or providence, with Albert's return home 3 days later. The hospital doctors, still awaiting the results of more complex tests, discharged the elderly man with recommendations for absolute rest, constant hydration, and strict medical supervision. The discharge was granted more at Richard's insistence, who argued that his father would recover better at home than by medical advice. Albert's 81st birthday was to be celebrated the following Saturday with a luncheon, a family tradition that Richard insisted on maintaining, despite his father's fragile state. He invited the family's longtime lawyer, Mr. August Roche, as well as some influential friends from their social circle, and Father Michael from St. Anthony's Parish, at the request of Mrs. Leader, Bianca's mother. Richard, aware that his father was too frail to resist, planned to use the occasion to propose in front of the lawyer and respectable witnesses an early transfer of part of the assets. He would claim an urgent need to better manage the businesses, protect the family fortune, and secure everyone's future. He had it all calculated, the timing, the words, the documents already prepared in a folder he kept in his safe. Bianca organized everything as if it were a perfect party. She hired a caterer, chose imported flowers, had the antique silverware polished. She distributed automatic smiles and precise instructions to the staff, staging a performance of family harmony. Stuart informed Marianne that on that day, the employees should remain invisible, serving efficiently but without drawing attention. Marianne felt fear grip her stomach like an iron fist. She knew that if she spoke up, she could be accused of manipulation, invasion of privacy, even a crime. Richard, suspecting that something was circulating beyond his control, had insinuated a few days earlier, in a cold conversation in the hallway, that any gossip from the kitchen could result in the immediate loss of Louise's scholarship and a defamation lawsuit. Employees who spread lies about their bosses end up without jobs and without references, he had said, looking directly into her eyes. And without references, no one else will hire you. I hope you understand the gravity of this. The threat was crystal clear. The social obstacle was gigantic, the automatic discrediting of a housekeeper in the face of wealthy and influential people. The evidence also weighed against her. The proof was on a simple old cell phone, in a video that could be questioned, contested, called a fake. All it would take was for someone to delete files, alter documents, bribe witnesses. On the night from Friday to Saturday, Marianne barely slept. Lying on the thin mattress next to Louise, she listened to her daughter's peaceful breathing and thought about everything she could lose. The simple but decent house where they lived with her mother. Louise's private school, where the girl was finally adjusting despite the bullying. The salary that supported 3 people. The dignity of having a steady job. of not depending on odd jobs, of being able to give her daughter a better future. But then she remembered the promise she had made to Albert. She remembered his blue eyes begging not to be abandoned. She remembered her grandfather, dying in the hospital, and the guilt she carried for not having acted in time. She got up slowly so as not to wake Louise, went to the kitchen and took the worn rosary from the pocket of her apron hanging on the chair. She knelt right there, on the cold cement floor, and prayed with an intensity that came from the depths of her soul. Lord, if I'm supposed to stay quiet, take this anguish from me. But if I'm supposed to speak, give me courage. Show me the way. On Saturday, when she arrived at the mansion, she found everything in final preparation. Tables set with white linen tablecloths, flower arrangements in crystal vases, gleaming glasses lined up with millimeter precision. The guests began to arrive at noon. Mr. August Roche, the lawyer, a gentleman with white hair and an upright posture. Councilman Anthony Charles, a friend of Richard's. Retired Judge Helen, a distant cousin of Mrs. Leader. And Father Michael, a man in his 60s, with greying hair and kind eyes. What Richard and Bianca didn't know was that the priest had brought with him, at the discreet invitation of Mrs. Irene from the prayer group, Charles, Edward from the health department. Introduced only as a friend who works in the health field, he circulated discreetly among the guests, observing, analyzing. The lunch began with Albert seated at the head of the table, visibly weak, propped up by cushions. He barely touched his food. When Dr. Myers offered to prepare a special, lighter soup, Marianne saw it all happen in slow motion. She saw Richard nod in agreement. She saw Myers go to the kitchen with his leather briefcase. It was at that moment that Charles Edward, who had been watching with professional attention, excused himself and discreetly followed in the same direction. He returned minutes later with a grave expression, holding a small vial he had taken from Myers's briefcase while the nutritionist was distracted preparing the soup. He approached Father Michael and murmured something in his ear. Albert, upon seeing the bowl of soup being brought by Dr. Myers, refused for the first time with firmness. "I don't want it. I'm tired of taking these things," Bianca insisted in a syrupy voice. "But Mr. Albert, it's for your own good." "I said I don't want it." An awkward silence fell over the table. It was then that Marianne, who was serving water, felt something greater than fear. She felt the presence of her own conscience, of the promise she had made, of all the prayers whispered in the early mornings. She reached into her apron pocket, squeezed the rosary, until she felt the beads mark her skin. She took a deep breath and in a voice that trembled but did not break, she asked for permission. "Mr. Richard, Mr. Albert, with everyone's pardon, I need to show you something important." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy as lead. Every face turned to her. Richard turned red with suppressed anger. Bianca's mouth fell open in outraged shock. But Marianne already had her phone in her hand, approaching the lawyer, Mr. Roche, and Father Michael. "Please, watch this. It's about what's happening to Mr. Albert." She played the video right there, holding the device with visibly shaking hands. The shaky images, the clear audio, Dr. Myers's voice confessing everything. Every passing second came at a cost, scornful looks from some guests, Richard's expression of contained fury, Bianca's immediate accusations. "This is an absurd invasion. She recorded without permission. This is a crime." But for the first time, Marianne's word was not alone. Charles Edward stood up, formally identified himself as a health department inspector, and showed the vial he had taken from Dr. Myers's briefcase. "This compound needs to be analyzed immediately, and we also have the preliminary report from the hospital, which already indicates the presence of undeclared substances in Mr. Albert's system." Mr. Roche, the lawyer, asked to see the video again. He watched it intently, his face hardening with each second. He turned to Richard. "We need to talk. Now. In private." The birthday party dissolved like sugar in water. Months passed before the consequences took final shape. The time that separates a complaint from justice is always long, marked by bureaucracy, investigations, technical reports, and hearings that drag on like a slow but steady river. Marianne learned to live with this weight, with the uncertainty that came with it, with the suspicious glances from some and the discreet admiration from others. The investigations by the health department and the regional nutrition board progressed slowly but with unwavering firmness. Charles Edward, the biochemist who had been present at the fateful lunch, personally coordinated the analysis of the seized vial and the blood. Samples Albert had provided at the hospital. The final report, presented 3 months later in a thick folder of technical documents, confirmed what Marianne had always known in her heart. The powders mixed into Albert's food contained improper and dangerous doses of a long-acting sedative, combined with a nutrient absorption blocker. It was a subtle formula, almost elegant in its cruelty. It didn't kill immediately. It didn't leave obvious traces in a superficial autopsy. It just progressively weakened, causing drowsiness, loss of appetite, and muscle deterioration. It made an 80-year-old man simply seem too old to live, the report used. Cold technical terms: controlled chronic poisoning, unapproved protocol for human use, malicious administration for incapacitation purposes. Dr. Fabian Myers was the first to fall. He lost his professional license in a regional board meeting that lasted 4 hours and ended with a unanimous decision. He began to face criminal charges for aggravated assault, practicing medicine without a license, document fraud, and criminal conspiracy. His private clinic closed its doors within 2 weeks. The patients who once trusted him fled like rats from a sinking ship. One morning, Marianne saw his photo in the local newspaper, a small image in the police section with the headline, "Nutritionist accused of poisoning elderly man in inheritance scheme." Richard faced even more severe consequences. Faced with evidence that he had pressured Dr. Myers, offered payment for illegal services, and concealed information from the medical team and his family, he was removed from the presidency of his own companies by a decision of the board of directors. The partners, fearful of being associated with the scandal, voted for his immediate dismissal. He also faced a civil lawsuit filed by his own father, represented by Mr. Auguste Roche, for attempted assault and misappropriation of assets. The state prosecutor's office opened a criminal investigation. There was no public humiliation, no moral lynching on social media, no personal revenge. Just the necessary and proportional measure for the world's justice to function within the rules that had always existed but rarely reached the powerful. Richard lost prestige, power, and the illusion of impunity, but he still had enough resources to live, albeit at a much more modest standard than he was used to. It was enough for him to feel the weight of his own choices without being completely destroyed. Bianca, who at first denied any involvement, was estranged from the Albright family after it was proven that she knew about the scheme and had remained silent in exchange for financial benefits. She returned to her mother's house, where Mrs. Leader welcomed her back with a coldness that spoke louder than words. The divorce was initiated by Richard himself in an attempt to distance himself from her complicity. Mr. Albert, after a long period of recovery with honest and competent medical supervision, began to walk in the garden of the house again. It was now adapted with stainless steel handrails in strategic points, padded benches under the trees, and gentle ramps where there had once been steps. His body still carried the inevitable frailty of age and the months of poisoning, but his eyes regained that bright, attentive blue sparkle. His appetite gradually returned, and with it came the simple pleasure of savoring real food, made with love. He began to participate more actively in decisions about his own estate, now surrounded by advisors recommended by Mr. Roche, people of proven trust. He dictated clear and irrevocable changes to his will, registered at a notary's office. Richard would continue to receive monthly financial assistance, but under the strict supervision of a management council. He would never have direct access to the bulk of the family fortune. A significant portion of the resources would be allocated to a small community center in Oakwood Creek, the very neighborhood where Marianne lived, where poor elderly people would have basic health care, companionship, decent meals, and recreational activities. The center was named the Living Hope Home and was inaugurated on a sunny September morning with the presence of Albert, Marianne, Father Michael, and dozens of neighborhood residents. Marianne cried when she saw the plaque being unveiled, when she saw the first elderly people entering through the open doors, when she realized that the pain she had gone through had borne real and palpable fruit. As for herself, Marianne was no longer just the housekeeper who went unnoticed in the glass-walled corridors. With an improved formal contract signed with all labor guarantees, she was invited by Albert to coordinate the routine of the caregivers and the house, precisely because of her attention to detail that had saved his life. Her salary tripled, and with it came a full benefits package, including a retirement plan and health insurance that covered Louise and Mrs. Nora. The blue notebook of annotations, once hidden and hastily scribbled in, transformed into an official and respected record. In it, Marianne noted with neat handwriting the medication times, meals, important health signs, and medical visits. It was consulted by nurses, doctors, and physical therapists. It became a fundamental part of Albert's daily care. The old cell phone, the one that had recorded the video that changed everything, was kept in a drawer as a memento, almost like a relic. Albert had bought her a new modern one, so you'll never be without a voice, without a way to ask for help when you need it. Louise, once ashamed of being a housekeeper's daughter, completely changed her attitude. At school, where she had previously suffered silent bullying and looks of superiority, she began to proudly say that her mother saved an important man because she wasn't afraid of the truth. The very classmates who had ridiculed her began to treat her differently when the story quietly leaked, when they realized that this shy girl had a real-life hero for a mother. Louise began to volunteer at the Living Hope home on Saturdays, reading to the elderly, helping serve meals, and talking with those who felt lonely. Carla continued as the family's trusted nurse, now with a permanent contract and Albert's eternal gratitude. She was the one who suggested important changes to the care protocol, who trained the new caregivers, who ensured that nothing similar would ever happen again. She became a close friend of Marianne's, a friendship born from their shared struggle. Ansel, the security guard who had saved a copy of the video and hadn't hesitated to help, was hired to work as security at the mansion's main gate. He now received a fair salary with all the benefits and brought someone inside the walls who from the beginning had believed Marianne's word when others would have dismissed it as the fantasy of a meddlesome maid. Mrs. Susan, the former cook who had told stories of the good old days, returned to work at the house on a special basis, a few times a week, preparing the dishes that Albert loved. She and Marianne now shared the kitchen, exchanging recipes, laughing at old stories, and rebuilding within those walls an atmosphere that smelled of a real home and not just a luxury property. On a clear November morning, almost a year after the lunch that had changed everything, the garden was as peaceful as Marianne had ever seen it. Birds perched on the low wall that had replaced part of the high fence, singing without fear. The smell of fresh coffee wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the scent of the roses that Mrs. Susan had insisted on planting in a new flower bed. Albert was slowly eating a slice of simple cornbread cake with jam, the kind Susan had been making since the old days. He chewed with visible pleasure, savoring each bite, commenting that it was perfect just the way. I remembered. Louise was sitting next to him in a wooden chair, reading aloud a story by Mark Twain for a school assignment. The old man listened attentively, asking questions, laughing at the right moments. Marianne watched from a distance, leaning against the glass door of the porch, a cup of hot coffee in her hands. She was wearing a new uniform, one she had chosen herself, in a lighter, more comfortable shade of blue. Her hair was down, no longer tied in the tight bun of before. For the first time in her life, she felt a true sense of belonging. She wasn't just an employee. She was part of that story, part of that transformation, part of that family rebuilt on a foundation of truth. She belonged to the house because she had helped save it from the rot that had been growing inside. She belonged to her own story because she had had the courage to write it when it would have been easier to run away. She belonged to her daughter's future because she had shown her through actions and not just words that dignity comes not from money or a surname, but from the choices we make when no one is watching. She reached into her pocket and touched the rosary she still carried there, worn from constant use, warmed by the contact with her skin. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh morning air, feeling the warm sun on her face. She smiled, a small but genuine smile, the kind that comes from within and lights up the eyes. She let the reverent silence fill the moment, a silence that was not empty, but full of peace. Deep in her heart, where the most profound certainties reside without needing words, a phrase took hold, serene and undeniable as a stone foundation. The same phrase she had repeated in so many pre-dawn prayers, in moments of fear, on nights of doubt. Whoever chooses to stand on the side of truth, even when the price seems too high, is never forsaken in the hands of God. There in that sun-drenched garden, surrounded by people who respected her, with her daughter growing up strong and her conscience at peace, Marianne knew that the promise had been fulfilled. Not as instant magic, but as a fruit planted with tears and harvested with gratitude. Justice had been done, truth had prevailed, and love had healed what had seemed irreparably broken. It was more than she had ever dared to dream of when she used to wake up at 4:30 in the morning in Oakwood Creek. It was living proof that sometimes the world still rewards those who do not give up on doing what is right.